The night is, I promise you, the dawn is coming.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
The Dark Knight, released in 2008, is widely considered a landmark in the superhero genre, representing not just a continuation of a story about a vigilante, but a profound exploration of morality, chaos, and human nature. Following Batman Begins, this film situates itself in a Gotham City that has known a fragile period of peace, where organized crime has been driven to the shadows, but corruption remains deeply rooted in the city's political and social structures. The narrative delves into the psyche of both its heroes and villains, portraying them not as mere caricatures, but as complex beings shaped by their experiences, desires, and traumas. Bruce Wayne, a billionaire orphan who dons the mantle of Batman, is depicted as a man constantly struggling to balance his personal life with the immense responsibility of safeguarding Gotham. He is not only combating criminals in the physical sense but is also wrestling with questions of ethics, justice, and the consequences of his vigilantism. The film's atmosphere is intentionally dark and realistic, reflecting Nolan's vision of a world where heroes and villains operate within shades of gray rather than clear-cut dichotomies. The story unfolds with the emergence of the Joker, a psychopathic criminal mastermind whose appearance is abrupt and terrifying. Unlike other villains, the Joker does not seek power or wealth. His motivations are rooted in pure anarchy and the desire to dismantle social order. His unpredictable actions and philosophical manipulations force both Gotham and its defenders to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. The Joker's arrival catalyzes a series of events that escalate the tension within the city, targeting not only individuals but also the very foundations of trust, law, and morality. Harvey Dent, once the shining symbol of hope as Gotham's district attorney, becomes a focal point in this moral battle, embodying the fragile line between justice and vengeance. The interplay between Batman, Dent, and the Joker forms the ethical and psychological core of the film, creating a narrative tension that drives the plot from start to finish. In parallel, the film explores the personal struggles of Bruce Wayne, whose dual identity as Batman isolates him from those around him. His relationship with Rachel Dawes, his childhood friend and love interest, is fraught with emotional complexity, as both characters wrestle with the impossibility of a normal life amidst the chaos of Gotham. Wayne's internal conflict is heightened by the need to protect not only the city but also the people he cares about, a responsibility that often forces him into morally ambiguous choices. The film emphasizes that heroism is not merely about physical bravery but also about enduring emotional and psychological burdens, highlighting the weight of ethical decisions in a world where traditional structures of justice often fail. The visual and cinematic elements of The Dark Knight play a crucial role in immersing audiences in its world. The film's cinematography, led by Wally Pfister, employs a combination of IMAX cameras and practical effects to capture large-scale action sequences with a sense of realism and intensity rarely seen in superhero films at the time. The streets of Gotham are depicted as gritty and lived in, with urban landscapes that reflect both the grandeur and the decay of the city. Action sequences, including the now iconic chase scenes, are meticulously crafted to feel plausible within the universe Nolan has constructed, enhancing audience engagement by grounding spectacle in reality. Hans Zimmer's score further amplifies the tension and emotional weight, blending rhythmic percussion with haunting melodies to create an auditory experience that mirrors the psychological intensity of the narrative. Character development is another central strength of the film. Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne/Batman conveys a brooding intensity and vulnerability that differentiates this iteration of the character from previous cinematic versions. Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker received universal acclaim for its unsettling authenticity and depth. His chaotic energy and philosophical musings transform the character from a comic book villain into a symbol of existential menace. Aaron Eckhart's Harvey Dent begins as an idealistic figure committed to law and justice but gradually succumbs to the corrosive effects of personal tragedy, illustrating how even the most principled individuals can be broken by circumstance and manipulation. The dynamic between these three characters drives the story forward, creating a narrative interplay that is as intellectually stimulating as it is emotionally resonant. The film's plot architecture is intricate, weaving multiple storylines together while maintaining a sense of tension and urgency. From the early sequences involving the Joker's initial acts of terror to the climactic confrontations that test the limits of Batman's moral code, every narrative beat serves to heighten the stakes. The Joker's schemes, including the iconic bank heist and the calculated endangerment of Gotham's citizens, are designed not merely to commit crimes but to challenge societal structures and ethical norms. These sequences underscore the film's philosophical inquiries into chaos, justice, and the human capacity for both heroism and corruption. Each scene is layered with narrative and thematic significance, ensuring that the audience is engaged not only by the action but also by the moral dilemmas presented on screen. The film also makes significant use of symbolism and metaphor. Gotham City itself operates almost as a character, reflecting the state of its inhabitants' morality and the fragility of social order. The recurring motifs of duality, masks, and hidden identities reinforce the themes of secrecy and the consequences of living in a morally ambiguous world. The Joker's chaotic philosophy contrasts sharply with Batman's vigilantism, raising questions about whether order can ever truly triumph over disorder, or whether the two exist in a perpetual, cyclical tension. The narrative invites viewers to consider the costs of heroism and the ethical compromises that often accompany the pursuit of justice, emphasizing that the line between good and evil is rarely clear-cut. On the production side, The Dark Knight was produced by Legendary Pictures and Syncope Incorporated, with Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas serving as producers. The film's budget was approximately $185 million, making it a high-stakes venture, but one that ultimately paid off both critically and commercially. The decision to film several sequences in IMAX and on practical locations, including real streets of Chicago standing in for Gotham, reflects Nolan's commitment to authenticity and immersive storytelling. Stunt coordination, pyrotechnics, and set design were executed with meticulous attention to detail, resulting in action sequences that feel grounded yet spectacular. The film's marketing campaign emphasized its darker, more realistic tone, positioning it as a serious cinematic experience rather than a conventional comic book adaptation. As the film progresses, the Joker's schemes become increasingly audacious and psychologically tormenting, forcing Batman, Gordon, and Dent to confront situations that test their ethics and resolve. The Joker begins by targeting Gotham's organized crime network, executing meticulously planned attacks that display both his intelligence and his unpredictability. Unlike traditional villains motivated by greed, he operates on the principle of chaos, demonstrating that his ultimate goal is to undermine the social order and reveal the fragility of morality under extreme pressure. The initial bank robbery scene, executed with military precision, immediately establishes the Joker as a formidable antagonist who operates without fear or remorse, setting a dark tone that permeates the rest of the film. The moral dilemmas introduced by the Joker escalate as he systematically challenges the concept of justice in Gotham. Harvey Dent, once the city's emblem of hope, is subjected to a harrowing test of character when the Joker orchestrates the kidnapping of both Dent and Rachel Dawes. Batman faces impossible choices, forced to prioritize whom to save, ultimately resulting in Rachel's death and Dent's physical and psychological mutilation. This turning point in the story is pivotal, as it marks Dent's transformation from a symbol of lawful justice to the vengeful figure of Two-Face. The tragedy of these events emphasizes the film's recurring theme that even the best intentions can be corrupted by unforeseen circumstances and personal loss. The Joker's influence is not merely physical but profoundly psychological, as he manipulates individuals into confronting the darkest aspects of their own nature. Batman's response to the escalating chaos reflects the moral complexity that defines the film. Unlike many superhero narratives where the hero operates without moral compromise, Batman struggles with the consequences of his vigilantism. He realizes that conventional crime-fighting methods are insufficient against the Joker's anarchy and that he may need to blur ethical boundaries to protect Gotham. This internal conflict is further exacerbated by the increasing public scrutiny and the complex dynamics of law enforcement, media, and political power. The tension between maintaining moral integrity and achieving practical results is a central narrative thread, highlighting that heroism in Nolan's vision is never straightforward or comfortable but inherently fraught with compromise and sacrifice. The interplay between Batman and the Joker forms the intellectual and philosophical core of the film. The Joker views the world as inherently chaotic and seeks to expose the hypocrisy and fragility of societal norms. Through carefully constructed scenarios, including the hijacking of ferries and orchestrated public dilemmas, he forces ordinary citizens and Gotham's heroes to make morally ambiguous choices, revealing the thin veneer of civilization. Batman, on the other hand, embodies order, responsibility, and ethical restraint, often restraining his own desires for vengeance in favor of a broader moral principle. Their confrontations are not simply physical battles but ideological clashes that interrogate the nature of justice, fear, and the human propensity for corruption under duress. The film's action sequences are notable not only for their scale but for their realism and narrative integration. The high-speed chases, explosive set pieces, and hand-to-hand combat are choreographed with precision, relying heavily on practical effects rather than CGI to heighten immersion. Each action moment serves a narrative purpose, whether it is advancing the plot, deepening character development, or illustrating thematic concepts such as the destructive potential of unrestrained chaos. The IMAX sequences, particularly those set against the backdrop of Gotham's urban skyline, create a visual grandeur that emphasizes the stakes of the story while maintaining a grounded, almost documentary-like realism that distinguishes The Dark Knight from conventional superhero fare. Rachel Dawes' role, though tragically cut short, is significant in grounding Bruce Wayne's emotional journey. Her presence represents the possibility of normalcy and human connection, contrasting with the alienating nature of Batman's crusade. Her death serves as a narrative catalyst for both Batman and Dent, intensifying the psychological and moral stakes of the film. Dent's descent into Two-Face is emblematic of the corrupting influence of trauma, illustrating that even the most principled individuals can be reshaped by personal loss and the manipulations of others. This transformation underscores one of the film's central philosophical inquiries, whether morality is an intrinsic quality or a fragile construct contingent upon circumstance and choice. Gotham City itself is depicted as a living, breathing entity, reflecting both grandeur and decay. The urban environment is integral to the storytelling, with its towering skyscrapers, shadowed alleys, and chaotic streets mirroring the thematic tension between order and chaos. The cinematography captures the duality of Gotham, moments of breathtaking beauty juxtaposed against scenes of stark destruction and despair. This visual dichotomy reinforces the narrative themes, emphasizing that the city, much like its inhabitants, exists in a constant state of tension between light and darkness, hope and despair, structure and anarchy. The careful attention to environmental storytelling allows the city to function as a character in its own right, shaping and reflecting the moral and psychological battles unfolding within the plot. Supporting characters, such as Alfred Pennyworth, play crucial roles in contextualizing Bruce Wayne's internal struggle. Alfred serves as both confidant and moral compass, offering guidance that is tempered by realism and personal experience. His reflections on heroism, loss, and the consequences of choice provide the audience with a lens through which to interpret Batman's actions, emphasizing the human cost of maintaining moral integrity in an imperfect world. The interactions between Alfred and Bruce deepen the emotional resonance of the narrative, highlighting the personal sacrifices inherent in Batman's mission and the loneliness that accompanies a life dedicated to a cause larger than oneself. The Joker's philosophical inquiries are articulated with chilling clarity through his dialogue and actions. His assertion that deep down, all individuals are capable of moral collapse under the right conditions challenges both the characters and the audience to examine their own assumptions about human nature. The ferry dilemma, in which citizens are forced to confront life and death choices, exemplifies the Joker's strategic brilliance and his commitment to exposing the darker tendencies within society. These narrative devices elevate The Dark Knight beyond a standard action film, transforming it into a meditation on ethics, fear, and the unpredictable consequences of human behavior. As the film approaches its climax, the tension between order and chaos reaches its zenith. Batman is forced to make decisions that have profound moral implications, choosing to shoulder the blame for crimes committed by Harvey Dent to preserve Dent's symbolic role as Gotham's White Knight. This decision encapsulates the thematic complexity of the film, illustrating the sacrifices required to maintain hope and stability in a world where truth and justice are often insufficient to combat evil. The resolution, while narratively satisfying, is morally ambiguous, reinforcing the idea that heroism is rarely rewarded in a straightforward manner and that the line between righteousness and deception is perpetually blurred. The casting of The Dark Knight played a pivotal role in shaping the film's tone and depth. Christian Bale returned as Bruce Wayne/Batman, delivering a performance that combined brooding intensity, physicality, and psychological nuance. Bale's dedication to portraying the duality of Wayne's character, both as the tormented billionaire and the relentless vigilante, added a layer of realism and complexity that anchored the narrative. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker became instantly iconic, with his interpretation redefining cinematic villainy. Ledger approached the character with meticulous preparation, including extensive journaling and voice experimentation, creating a performance that was unpredictable, unsettling, and deeply compelling. Aaron Eckhart embodied Harvey Dent with charisma and sincerity, effectively conveying both his idealism as Gotham's district attorney and his tragic descent into Two-Face. Maggie Gyllenhaal, replacing Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes, brought a grounded emotional depth to her role, highlighting the personal stakes for Bruce Wayne. Michael Caine reprised his role as Alfred, Wayne's loyal confidant, providing wisdom, moral perspective, and emotional resonance. Gary Oldman's portrayal of Commissioner Gordon lent gravitas and steadfastness, embodying the law's struggle to maintain order amidst chaos. Additional supporting performances by Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, Monique Gabriella Kernan as Detective Ramirez, and Cillian Murphy in a minor yet symbolic role as Scarecrow contributed to a robust ensemble that enriched the narrative and created a believable Gotham City ecosystem. On the production front, The Dark Knight was a collaboration between Warner Bros., Legendary Pictures, and Syncope Incorporated, with Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas serving as producers. Filming took place primarily in Chicago, which stood in for Gotham City, alongside select locations in Hong Kong and London to achieve the international scope required for certain sequences. Nolan's insistence on practical effects over CGI whenever possible elevated the realism of the action scenes, with elaborate stunts such as the truck flip, the chaotic bank heist, and the destruction of the Joker's escape routes being executed in real-world settings. The IMAX cameras were employed for key sequences, marking one of the earliest uses of the format in a major blockbuster, allowing for unprecedented visual clarity and scale. The production design, led by Nathan Crowley, combined Gothic architectural elements with modern urban aesthetics, reflecting Gotham's dichotomy of grandeur and decay, while the costume design by Lindy Hemming reinforced character identity, Batman's armor-like suit symbolizing both protection and intimidation, the Joker's makeup and garb communicating his chaotic philosophy. The film premiered on July 14, 2008, at the Odeon Leicester Square in London, before its wide release on July 18, 2008. Audiences and critics alike were immediately struck by its intensity, moral complexity, and cinematic craftsmanship. The marketing campaign emphasized the film's darker tone and mature themes, distinguishing it from conventional superhero films and positioning it as a serious cinematic experience. Trailers highlighted both the high-octane action sequences and the psychological tension between Batman and the Joker, effectively capturing public attention and building anticipation. The box office response was overwhelming. The Dark Knight grossed over $1 billion worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film of 2008 and one of the most successful superhero films of all time. Its financial success reflected not only the public's enthusiasm for the franchise but also the cultural resonance of its themes and characters. Critically, The Dark Knight was lauded for its narrative sophistication, thematic depth, and performances. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker earned universal acclaim, with many critics considering it a transformative performance in cinematic history. Posthumously, Ledger was awarded the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, cementing the role's iconic status. The film also received nominations for Best Cinematography and Best Sound Editing, highlighting its technical achievements alongside its narrative excellence. Reviewers praised the screenplay, action choreography, and the seamless integration of philosophical inquiry with blockbuster spectacle, noting that the film transcended traditional genre conventions. The moral ambiguity and ethical dilemmas posed within the story invited both scholarly discussion and widespread audience debate, reinforcing the film's lasting cultural significance. Culturally, The Dark Knight influenced not only subsequent superhero films but also broader cinematic trends. Its realistic depiction of a superhero operating within a complex urban society inspired other filmmakers to approach genre storytelling with greater seriousness and psychological depth. The film's exploration of themes such as vigilantism, chaos, and moral compromise resonated beyond entertainment, prompting discussions on ethics, justice, and social responsibility. Iconic imagery, such as the Joker's haunting smile and Batman's imposing silhouette, became embedded in popular culture, while memorable lines like the Joker's philosophical musings achieved widespread recognition. Merchandise, video games, and adaptations further solidified its impact, creating a multifaceted cultural footprint that extends far beyond the cinematic release itself. The editing and pacing of the film are notable for their contribution to tension and narrative cohesion. Lee Smith's editing maintained a rhythm that balanced high-stakes action with quieter, emotionally charged moments, allowing audiences to absorb both spectacle and psychological nuance. Scenes transition seamlessly between multiple plotlines, ensuring clarity despite the complexity of intertwining narratives involving Batman, the Joker, Dent, Gordon, and the citizens of Gotham. This careful orchestration allows the film to explore philosophical and moral questions without sacrificing entertainment value, a balance that is central to its enduring appeal. The soundtrack by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard amplifies these elements, using dissonance, pulsating rhythms, and thematic motifs to reinforce suspense, chaos, and emotional resonance. The film's influence extended to award recognition and industry innovation. Beyond Ledger's Oscar, The Dark Knight was celebrated at the BAFTA Awards, the Saturn Awards, and multiple critics' associations, winning accolades for technical artistry, performance, and overall achievement in filmmaking. Its success demonstrated that superhero films could achieve both critical acclaim and commercial viability, paving the way for future franchises to embrace complex narratives and darker tonalities. The integration of practical effects, IMAX cinematography, and narrative sophistication set a new standard for blockbuster filmmaking, influencing directors and producers in both genre and mainstream cinema. Finally, The Dark Knight's enduring legacy lies in its ability to combine spectacle with intellectual engagement. It is remembered not merely as a superhero film, but as a meditation on morality, ethics, and the human capacity for both heroism and corruption. Its characters remain iconic, its imagery memorable, and its thematic inquiries relevant across decades. The film's continued popularity in home media, streaming platforms, and cultural discourse attests to its significance as a transformative work within cinema, illustrating the potential of genre storytelling to address profound human questions while delivering thrilling entertainment. The careful blending of narrative depth, character complexity, visual innovation, and philosophical inquiry ensures that The Dark Knight remains a benchmark for both filmmakers and audiences seeking a richer, more meaningful cinematic experience. The narrative of The Dark Knight unfolds with a meticulously structured tension that escalates with every sequence, drawing viewers deeper into Gotham's dark and complex world. The Joker's presence is omnipresent, even in scenes where he is not physically present, as his actions and reputation instill fear and uncertainty throughout the city. Each criminal act he commits serves a dual purpose, advancing the plot and challenging the moral and psychological limits of both Gotham's citizens and its defenders. Early in the story, the Joker demonstrates his strategic cunning during the bank heist, where he manipulates the criminals to turn on each other, ensuring the operation's success without compromising his own anonymity. This scene establishes him as both intelligent and terrifyingly unpredictable, a villain whose methods are as chilling as his philosophy. The precision with which Nolan orchestrates these sequences creates suspense that is both thrilling and intellectually stimulating, prompting viewers to consider not just what will happen next, but why characters behave as they do under extreme circumstances. Batman's role as Gotham's protector is further complicated by the ethical dilemmas introduced by the Joker's actions. The Joker deliberately targets moral codes and societal norms, forcing Batman to confront questions about the limits of justice and the potential consequences of his choices. One of the film's most compelling sequences involves the Joker's manipulation of Gotham's prisoners, where he pits them against each other, illustrating how fear and desperation can override ethical behavior. This sequence underscores the film's exploration of human nature, demonstrating that morality is often contingent on circumstance rather than intrinsic to character. Batman's struggle to maintain control in the face of such chaos highlights the psychological weight of his mission, emphasizing that heroism entails not only physical courage but also the capacity for self-restraint and ethical judgment in morally ambiguous situations. The personal stakes for Bruce Wayne intensify as his relationships intersect with his mission. Rachel Dawes' presence serves as a moral anchor, reminding him of the human consequences of his crusade. Her tragic death at the hands of the Joker is a narrative pivot that catalyzes Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, illustrating the film's recurring theme that even the most virtuous individuals can be corrupted by trauma and loss. Dent's descent is portrayed with careful attention to psychological realism. The combination of physical disfigurement, personal grief, and orchestrated manipulation by the Joker transforms him into an agent of vengeance. This transformation raises profound questions about the nature of justice, as Dent abandons the rule of law in favor of a personal code dictated by chance, symbolized by the coin he uses to decide life and death. The juxtaposition of Batman's disciplined moral code and Two-Face's capricious justice highlights the central tension of the film, the fragile balance between order and chaos, and the consequences of ethical compromise in a morally complex world. The Joker's tactics in The Dark Knight are emblematic of his philosophical outlook. His schemes are carefully designed to expose the inherent fragility of societal structures and the latent capacity for moral collapse in ordinary people. The Fairy Dilemma is perhaps the most striking example, as he places innocent civilians in a life-or-death scenario where they must decide whether to sacrifice others to save themselves. This act of engineered terror forces both the characters and the audience to grapple with ethical questions about self-preservation, responsibility, and the social contract. The Joker's methods are not simply about achieving immediate criminal objectives, they are about demonstrating that under extreme conditions, the veneer of civility can dissolve, revealing the darker tendencies of human nature. This philosophical underpinning elevates The Dark Knight from conventional action cinema into a meditation on morality, chaos, and the human condition. Cinematically, the film's visual storytelling reinforces its thematic and narrative complexity. Wally Pfister's cinematography captures Gotham as a city of stark contrasts, with scenes of illuminated skyscrapers juxtaposed against shadowed alleys and urban decay. The practical effects, including large-scale explosions, vehicle stunts, and IMAX sequences, immerse the audience in the physical reality of the narrative, heightening both suspense and emotional engagement. Lighting, framing, and camera movement are used strategically to underscore character psychology and thematic tension, such as the use of shadows to reflect moral ambiguity or wide-angle cityscapes to convey isolation and vulnerability. The meticulous production design, from the detailed interiors of Wayne Manor to the chaotic streets dominated by the Joker, establishes a tangible sense of place that is integral to the storytelling, making Gotham itself feel like a living entity that responds to and shapes the actions of its inhabitants. The interactions between Batman and the Joker are layered with psychological tension, philosophical debate, and narrative significance. Each confrontation serves as a dialogue between order and chaos, with Batman representing ethical restraint, discipline, and a commitment to justice, while the Joker embodies unpredictability, immorality, and the seductive appeal of anarchy. Their exchanges are carefully written to challenge audience perceptions, with the Joker often revealing uncomfortable truths about the limitations and consequences of Batman's moral code. The tension between these two characters is intensified by their contrasting methods, Batman's reliance on preparation, strategy, and restraint versus the Joker's improvisational, manipulative, and psychologically disruptive tactics. This interplay transforms their conflict into more than a simple hero-villain dynamic, positioning it as a broader exploration of ethics, choice, and the consequences of moral decision-making under pressure. Supporting characters deepen the film's exploration of morality and human behavior. Commissioner Gordon embodies institutional integrity and perseverance, navigating the tension between law enforcement protocols and the extraordinary challenges posed by Gotham's criminal underworld. Alfred Pennyworth serves as both confidant and conscience, offering Bruce Wayne moral guidance, pragmatic advice, and emotional support, highlighting the human cost of vigilantism. Lucius Fox provides the technological and logistical backbone for Batman's mission, demonstrating the interplay between human ingenuity and ethical responsibility. Each supporting character is carefully integrated into the narrative to reinforce themes, provide narrative balance, and illuminate the psychological and moral stakes faced by the primary protagonists. The emotional resonance of The Dark Knight is further heightened by its music and sound design. Hans Zimmer's score, in collaboration with James Newton Howard, combines pulsating tension with subtle emotional cues, amplifying suspense, fear, and psychological intensity. The Joker is often accompanied by dissonant, chaotic musical motifs that mirror his unpredictability and threat, while Batman's presence is reinforced by motifs that convey determination, moral struggle, and controlled power. Sound editing integrates city noises, explosions, and subtle audio cues to immerse the audience in Gotham's chaotic environment, ensuring that the sensory experience reinforces narrative and thematic elements rather than merely providing spectacle. The film's narrative structure maintains tension through parallel storylines, interweaving Batman's vigilantism, the Joker's chaos, and Harvey Dent's transformation into a cohesive, morally complex arc. Nolan carefully balances multiple threads, ensuring that each plotline is distinct yet thematically interconnected. The pacing allows moments of high-intensity action to be offset by quieter, introspective sequences that explore character psychology, moral dilemmas, and the consequences of choice. This structural sophistication enables the film to engage audiences intellectually and emotionally, prompting reflection on ethical questions while delivering compelling visual storytelling. The escalation of chaos in The Dark Knight reaches its most dramatic point with the Joker's series of meticulously orchestrated public threats. He demonstrates that fear is one of the most potent weapons in destabilizing society. The Joker's plan to release two ferries, one carrying civilians and the other criminals, into a life-or-death situation serves as a philosophical experiment as much as a criminal act. By forcing the passengers to consider whether to destroy the other boat to save themselves, he exposes the fragility of trust and the human instinct for survival. This scenario is emblematic of the film's overarching exploration of morality under duress. It is not just about Batman and the Joker, it is about the choices of ordinary people when confronted with extraordinary circumstances. The audience is invited to confront similar questions: would they act altruistically or succumb to fear and self-preservation? This moral ambiguity is what elevates The Dark Knight beyond a typical superhero narrative, turning it into a psychological and ethical study. The Joker's manipulation extends to Gotham's symbols of hope, most prominently Harvey Dent. Dent's transformation into Two-Face represents the vulnerability of ideals to personal trauma and external influence. Once Gotham's White Knight, Dent succumbs to despair after Rachel's death and his own disfigurement, embodying the seductive power of revenge. Two-Face's reliance on a coin to make life-and-death decisions symbolizes the randomness of justice when morality is abandoned, contrasting sharply with Batman's deliberate, ethically grounded decision-making. The interplay between Batman's moral code and Two-Face's capricious sense of justice serves as a critical narrative axis, reinforcing the film's examination of choice, responsibility, and the consequences of ethical compromise. Batman's internal struggle intensifies as the consequences of his actions, and inactions, become increasingly personal. He faces the challenge of preserving Gotham's faith in justice while preventing the city from descending into anarchy. The Joker's chaos forces him to consider methods that conflict with his principles, such as surveillance, intimidation, and calculated deception. One of the most poignant moments reflecting this tension occurs when Batman decides to take the blame for Two-Face's crimes to maintain Dent's symbolic role as Gotham's moral beacon. This decision underscores the ethical complexity of vigilantism. The hero sacrifices his personal reputation to protect the greater good, embodying the film's recurring theme that true heroism often requires anonymity, patience, and moral compromise. The relationship between Bruce Wayne and Rachel Dawes adds emotional depth and stakes to the narrative. Rachel functions as the moral touchstone of Bruce's life, representing normalcy, love, and the human cost of his nocturnal crusade. Her death is not merely a plot device but a deeply symbolic event that catalyzes multiple character arcs, including Batman's heightened resolve and dense tragic descent. Rachel's absence is felt throughout the latter half of the film, emphasizing the emotional burden carried by those who choose to intervene in a world dominated by chaos and corruption. Her death reinforces the narrative assertion that heroism and morality are fraught with personal sacrifice and that the consequences of action, or inaction, are deeply human. Cinematically, the film's urban landscape functions as a character in its own right. Gotham City is depicted with architectural grandeur that juxtaposes human achievement with moral decay. The towering skyscrapers, shadowed alleyways, and chaotic streets visually mirror the narrative tension between order and disorder. Practical set pieces, such as the hospital explosion orchestrated by the Joker, provide visceral stakes while reinforcing thematic elements. Lighting and framing are used to emphasize emotional and psychological states. Harsh shadows underscore moral ambiguity, while wide cityscape shots convey isolation, vulnerability, and the overwhelming scale of the hero's challenge. This attention to visual storytelling elevates the film from conventional action fare to a fully immersive narrative experience. The interplay of dialogue and philosophical exposition is another hallmark of the film. The Joker's lines, often casual yet deeply unsettling, serve as aphorisms on chaos, morality, and human nature. His ability to articulate complex, uncomfortable truths about society and individual behavior challenges both characters and viewers, creating a psychological tension that is sustained throughout the narrative. Batman's responses, often restrained and morally deliberate, contrast with the Joker's anarchic philosophy, highlighting the intellectual and ethical dimensions of their conflict. Each exchange between these two forces is loaded with subtext, revealing both character motivations and thematic undercurrents. Supporting characters continue to enrich the narrative, illustrating the complexity of Gotham's social fabric. Alfred Pennyworth provides wisdom tempered by realism, warning Bruce of the dangers inherent in losing his moral compass while reinforcing the human cost of vigilantism. Commissioner Gordon embodies institutional integrity, navigating between law enforcement protocol and the extraordinary measures demanded by the Joker's chaos. Lucius Fox represents the ethical intersection of technology and responsibility, providing Batman with tools that must be wielded carefully. These characters are not merely side roles, they anchor the narrative, providing perspective, context, and moral commentary that enrich the audience's understanding of both the story and the ethical questions it raises. Action sequences in The Dark Knight serve narrative, psychological, and thematic purposes rather than simply providing spectacle. The bank heist, the truck chase, and the climactic confrontation in Gotham streets are designed to test characters physically and morally. The practical effects and meticulous choreography enhance the realism, while IMAX cinematography magnifies the scale and immersion. These sequences reflect the stakes of the narrative. Chaos, destruction, and moral consequence are intertwined, making action a vehicle for exploring character, choice, and philosophical themes. The Joker's philosophy of chaos reaches its apex when he manipulates Gotham's citizens into situations that force moral compromise. Each of his schemes, from the fairy dilemma to orchestrated public threats, functions as a social experiment designed to expose fear, selfishness, and moral fragility. The film's examination of these moments emphasizes the central question: in the absence of external enforcement, what drives human behavior, ethics, self-interest, or survival instinct? Through these scenarios, Nolan invites viewers to reflect on human nature, societal structures, and the conditions under which morality can collapse. Finally, The Dark Knight's conclusion balances narrative resolution with moral ambiguity. Batman's decision to take responsibility for Two-Face's crimes preserves the symbol of hope that Harvey Dent represents, reinforcing the theme that sometimes ethical action requires personal sacrifice and public deception. The Joker remains unpunished, symbolizing the persistent nature of chaos and evil, while Batman assumes the burden of Gotham's perception of justice. This ending resonates with the film's philosophical core, asserting that heroism is inseparable from ethical compromise, personal sacrifice, and the recognition that the world is never purely black or white. The opening sequences of The Dark Knight immediately establish the Joker as a master manipulator and a figure of existential threat. The bank heist, executed with chilling precision, not only demonstrates his criminal genius but also reflects his philosophical approach. He creates chaos within a structured system, exposing the fragility of human cooperation when motivated by fear and self-interest. Each of the robbers, unaware of the Joker's identity, is used as a tool in his experiment, highlighting his capacity for psychological manipulation. This opening sets the thematic tone of the film, the tension between order and chaos, the consequences of moral choice, and the pervasive vulnerability of social institutions. The scene is tightly choreographed, blending suspense, action, and intellectual intrigue, and it immediately signals that this is a story concerned as much with ideas as with spectacle. As the plot unfolds, Batman's vigilantism is portrayed with increasing moral complexity. The escalation of Gotham's criminal activities, orchestrated by the Joker, forces him to reconsider the limits of his own code. One striking sequence involves Batman's surveillance of the city using advanced technology to locate the Joker, a moment that raises ethical questions about privacy, security, and the balance between individual rights and the greater good. The moral ambiguity inherent in this scene is emblematic of the film's exploration of ethical dilemmas. Even heroes must navigate a complex web of consequences when confronting threats that operate outside the bounds of conventional morality. This tension between necessity and principle pervades Batman's arc throughout the film, defining his internal struggle and shaping the narrative's philosophical depth. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face is portrayed with psychological realism and narrative sophistication. After the Joker orchestrates the death of Rachel Dawes and leaves Dent physically and emotionally scarred, Dent abandons the moral framework that once defined him. His reliance on a coin to determine justice underscores the randomness and fragility of ethical decision-making in a world corrupted by trauma and manipulation. Two-Face's vendetta against those he deems responsible for his loss mirrors the Joker's chaos but operates within a distorted moral logic, emphasizing the film's central tension between order and disorder. Through Dent, the film interrogates the human capacity for both heroism and vengeance, showing how personal trauma can distort ideals and ethical judgment. The Joker's psychological warfare extends beyond individual characters to the city of Gotham itself. By creating scenarios that force citizens to confront fear, trust, and moral compromise, he destabilizes the social fabric and challenges the authority of law enforcement. The ferry dilemma is a particularly vivid example, as it forces passengers to consider whether self-preservation justifies the harm of others. This narrative device underscores one of the film's central philosophical questions: are morality and altruism innate, or are they contingent upon circumstance? The tension in these sequences is amplified by the visual storytelling, including tight framing, dramatic lighting, and dynamic pacing, all of which immerse the audience in the ethical stakes while reinforcing the psychological intensity of the narrative. Cinematography plays a crucial role in conveying the film's themes and emotional resonance. Wally Pfister's use of IMAX and large-format cameras for key action sequences enhances both scale and realism, allowing audiences to experience Gotham's chaos firsthand. Wide cityscape shots juxtapose the enormity of the urban environment against the individual struggles of characters, emphasizing isolation, vulnerability, and the high stakes of vigilantism. Shadows and low-key lighting are used to reinforce moral ambiguity, while carefully composed close-ups capture subtle emotional shifts, particularly in scenes involving Batman, the Joker, and Harvey Dent. The visual language of the film complements its narrative sophistication, ensuring that each shot contributes to the storytelling rather than merely serving as spectacle. Dialogue in The Dark Knight is carefully crafted to convey both character psychology and philosophical inquiry. The Joker's lines, often delivered with casual menace, function as aphorisms about chaos, fear, and human nature, challenging both the characters and the audience to confront uncomfortable truths. Batman's measured, principled responses highlight the contrast between deliberate moral reasoning and the Joker's anarchic worldview. These exchanges are central to the film's intellectual engagement, transforming confrontations into opportunities for reflection on ethics, choice, and societal order. Even minor characters contribute to this dialogue, offering perspectives that reinforce the narrative's moral complexity and thematic depth. Alfred Pennyworth's role as Bruce Wayne's confidant is crucial in grounding the emotional and ethical stakes of the story. Alfred provides wisdom, caution, and perspective, warning Bruce about the dangers of losing his moral compass and the personal cost of his crusade. These interactions humanize Batman, reminding the audience that behind the mask is a man burdened by responsibility, grief, and the weight of ethical decision-making. Alfred's counsel often emphasizes the distinction between what is morally right and what is strategically necessary, reinforcing the film's recurring theme that heroism often requires compromise, sacrifice, and difficult choices. The interplay between action and narrative tension in The Dark Knight is meticulously balanced. Sequences such as the truck chase, the Joker's infiltration of the Gotham hospital, and the climactic confrontation in the streets serve multiple functions. They provide adrenaline-driven spectacle, advance character arcs, and illuminate thematic concerns. Each action scene is carefully constructed with practical effects and strategic cinematography to enhance realism, ensuring that the audience remains invested not just in the visual excitement but in the psychological and moral stakes at play. The combination of realism, scale, and narrative integration exemplifies Nolan's approach to filmmaking, in which action serves story, character, and theme simultaneously. Batman's moral journey reaches its culmination in the film's resolution. By choosing to take responsibility for Two-Face's crimes, he preserves Gotham's faith in justice and upholds the symbolic power of hope represented by Harvey Dent. This act encapsulates the central ethical tension of the narrative. The hero must sometimes operate in the shadows, bearing personal burden to protect the collective good. The Joker's ultimate failure to break Batman morally, despite orchestrating widespread chaos, reinforces the enduring tension between order and disorder. The resolution is morally complex, leaving the audience to grapple with questions about heroism, sacrifice, and the limits of ethical action in a flawed world. The cultural impact of The Dark Knight extends far beyond its immediate commercial success. Heath Ledger's performance, posthumously awarded the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, redefined cinematic villainy, influencing countless subsequent portrayals of complex antagonists. The film's exploration of moral ambiguity, psychological tension, and societal fragility resonated with both critics and audiences, demonstrating that superhero narratives could engage with profound philosophical questions. Its box office success, critical acclaim, and enduring popularity cemented The Dark Knight as a benchmark in both superhero cinema and mainstream filmmaking, influencing narrative strategies, character development, and visual storytelling in films that followed. The film's opening sequence, the Joker's bank heist, immediately establishes the tone of unpredictability and psychological tension that pervades The Dark Knight. Every detail, from the precise choreography of the robbers to the Joker's calculated manipulation of his accomplices, signals his methodical chaos. He does not simply commit crime for personal gain. Each act is designed to provoke fear, disrupt social order, and test the ethical boundaries of those involved. The Joker's philosophy of chaos is introduced subtly here, and the tension of the scene is amplified by practical effects, carefully framed shots, and a soundtrack that builds anticipation without overwhelming the narrative. This opening sets the stage for the film's central moral conflict, the confrontation between order, represented by Batman, and unrestrained chaos, embodied by the Joker. Batman's initial attempts to maintain control over Gotham are framed within the context of surveillance, strategy, and physical prowess. Unlike many traditional superheroes, his actions are not motivated solely by vengeance or duty but by an ethical commitment to protecting a city that cannot defend itself. The tension between his moral code and the exigencies of combating crime is heightened by the Joker's unpredictable behavior. In one sequence, Batman uses advanced surveillance technology to track the Joker's movements, raising implicit questions about privacy, ethics, and the balance of power. Nolan presents this as a morally complex choice. Batman must choose between violating ethical norms or risking innocent lives. This early exploration of moral ambiguity is foundational to the narrative and continues to influence each subsequent decision Bruce Wayne faces. The character of Harvey Dent is crucial in illustrating the fragility of morality under extreme circumstances. Initially portrayed as Gotham's idealistic White Knight, Dent's commitment to law and justice provides a counterpoint to Batman's extrajudicial methods. However, after Rachel Dawes' death and his own physical disfigurement, Dent transforms into Two-Face, embodying the corrosive effects of trauma, grief, and manipulated perception. His use of a coin to dictate life and death decisions symbolizes the randomness of justice when personal ethics are abandoned. This transformation demonstrates one of the film's central themes, that moral frameworks, however principled, are vulnerable to corruption, and that human nature can oscillate between heroism and vengeance depending on circumstance. Rachel Dawes' narrative function extends beyond her relationship with Bruce Wayne. She represents the moral stakes of his crusade. Her presence highlights the human cost of vigilantism and the impossibility of maintaining personal relationships while operating as a symbol of fear and justice. Her death catalyzes major narrative developments, propelling both Batman and Harvey Dent into trajectories defined by loss, grief, and moral decision-making. Rachel's character embodies the ethical and emotional consequences of heroism, reminding the audience that the choices of a protector reverberate through the lives of those around him. Her absence reinforces the loneliness of Batman's path and the personal sacrifices required to maintain justice in a chaotic world. The Joker's methods of psychological manipulation are central to the film's exploration of human behavior. His orchestration of public dilemmas, including the fairy scenario, exposes the tension between altruism and self-interest in extreme circumstances. He uses fear as a tool to destabilize societal order, demonstrating that morality is often contingent upon context rather than being an inherent human trait. Each scenario engineered by the Joker serves as both narrative and philosophical exposition, compelling viewers to consider how ordinary people react under life-threatening stress. The film uses these moments not merely for suspense but as a lens through which to explore ethical philosophy, human nature, and societal fragility. The cinematography of The Dark Knight enhances the narrative and emotional impact through careful visual composition. Wally Pfister's work combines IMAX photography, wide urban landscapes, and intimate character shots to emphasize thematic elements. Gotham's skyline, with its towering structures and shadowed alleys, reflects the tension between civilization and chaos, while close-ups on characters' faces capture subtle psychological shifts. The interplay of light and shadow is used to reinforce moral ambiguity, particularly in scenes involving Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. By treating Gotham as both setting and metaphor, the cinematography integrates environmental storytelling, ensuring that the city itself reflects and amplifies the narrative's ethical and emotional stakes. Dialogue throughout the film is layered with philosophical and psychological depth. The Joker's lines, often delivered with casual menace, serve as aphorisms on chaos, fear, and human nature. Batman's measured responses highlight the tension between ethical principle and practical necessity. These verbal exchanges are central to the film's intellectual engagement, framing conflicts not just in physical terms but as ethical and philosophical debates. Even minor characters, such as Alfred and Lucius Fox, contribute insight into moral responsibility, human fallibility, and the consequences of choice, reinforcing the overarching themes and ensuring that every interaction carries narrative and ethical weight. Alfred Pennyworth's role is critical in humanizing Batman and contextualizing his ethical struggle. Alfred provides moral guidance, cautionary advice, and emotional support, highlighting the personal cost of heroism. Through their conversations, the audience gains insight into the psychological burden Bruce Wayne bears and the ethical dilemmas he navigates. Alfred's reflections underscore the film's central thesis, that true heroism often involves moral compromise, anonymity, and the acceptance of personal sacrifice for the greater good. His presence reminds viewers that ethical decision-making is a human endeavor fraught with uncertainty and consequence. The film's action sequences are carefully integrated into the narrative to serve both spectacle and thematic exploration. The truck chase, hospital explosion, and rooftop confrontations are not merely visually exciting, they test character morality, decision-making, and ethical restraint. Practical effects, combined with precise choreography and IMAX cinematography, ensure realism, grounding the narrative in a tangible reality. Each sequence heightens tension, advances the plot, and emphasizes the stakes of moral and ethical decision-making. These action set pieces function as physical manifestations of the conflict between order and chaos, illustrating how narrative, character, and theme can be simultaneously advanced through spectacle. Batman's moral journey culminates in the decision to assume responsibility for Two-Face's crimes, preserving Gotham's faith in justice. This act encapsulates the tension between ethical principle and pragmatic action, emphasizing that heroism often requires deception and personal sacrifice. The Joker remains unpunished, a reminder that chaos is persistent and morality is not always rewarded. The resolution reinforces the film's exploration of ethical ambiguity, illustrating that moral action is frequently complex, imperfect, and defined by its consequences rather than its purity. The cultural impact of The Dark Knight extends beyond its box office success, influencing narrative strategies, character development, and visual storytelling in the superhero genre. Ledger's performance reshaped expectations for cinematic villainy, while the film's sophisticated exploration of morality, psychological tension, and societal instability demonstrated that genre films could engage deeply with philosophical questions. Its success in blending spectacle with intellectual inquiry inspired a generation of filmmakers to approach blockbuster storytelling with greater ambition, nuance, and thematic complexity. The opening bank heist sequence sets the stage for the Joker's unique methodology and philosophy, establishing him as more than a conventional villain. He uses precision, manipulation, and psychological insight to control the situation, demonstrating both intelligence and unpredictability. Each robber unknowingly contributes to the success of the scheme, emphasizing the Joker's ability to exploit human weakness and social hierarchies. Nolan uses tight framing, quick cuts, and suspenseful pacing to heighten tension, making the audience feel both exhilarated and uneasy. This scene immediately signals the film's broader concerns: the fragility of order, the influence of fear on decision-making, and the consequences of moral choice. The Joker's unpredictable behavior challenges both the characters within the story and the audience's expectations, setting a precedent for the escalating psychological and ethical conflicts that follow. Batman's strategy in countering Gotham's rising criminal threat is portrayed with careful moral and tactical nuance. The surveillance sequence, where he uses advanced technology to locate the Joker, raises critical questions about ethical limits, personal privacy, and the greater good. While his actions are designed to save lives and prevent chaos, they also encroach upon the autonomy of Gotham's citizens, highlighting the tension between moral principle and practical necessity. This sequence underscores one of the film's central philosophical inquiries: how far can a hero go before crossing ethical boundaries, and what is the cost of such transgressions? Batman's struggle to navigate these dilemmas reflects the narrative's ongoing exploration of moral ambiguity, emphasizing that ethical heroism is rarely clear-cut. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face is one of the film's most compelling and tragic arcs. Once the embodiment of justice and idealism, Dent is broken by personal loss, physical trauma, and the manipulations of the Joker. His reliance on the coin to make life and death decisions symbolizes the randomness of justice when personal ethics are abandoned. Two-Face's actions illustrate the destructive potential of vengeance and the fragility of moral integrity, highlighting the thematic contrast between order and chaos. Nolan uses visual cues, dialogue, and performance to make this transformation both believable and thematically resonant, showing how circumstance and manipulation can warp even the most principled individuals. Rachel Dawes' narrative function, though cut short, remains pivotal. She represents the personal stakes of Batman's crusade and the human cost of vigilantism. Her death catalyzes significant narrative developments, intensifying Bruce Wayne's moral resolve and Harvey Dent's tragic descent. Rachel's absence is felt throughout the remainder of the film, symbolizing the emotional and ethical consequences of heroism. By removing this moral anchor, Nolan heightens the psychological stakes for Batman and reinforces the narrative's exploration of grief, responsibility, and moral sacrifice. The Joker's social experiments, including the fairy dilemma, highlight the fragility of societal norms under extreme conditions. By placing ordinary citizens in morally fraught life-and-death situations, he exposes the latent capacity for selfishness, fear, and moral compromise. These sequences serve both as narrative tension points and philosophical investigations, forcing the audience to reflect on human nature, ethics, and the limits of altruism. The use of practical effects, tight framing, and suspenseful pacing immerses viewers in the psychological weight of these scenarios, ensuring that the tension is both emotional and intellectual. Cinematography in The Dark Knight enhances both narrative clarity and thematic resonance. Pfister's use of IMAX sequences, wide cityscape shots, and shadowed interiors creates a sense of scale and moral ambiguity. Gotham itself is treated as a character, with its towering skyscrapers, shadowed alleys, and chaotic streets reflecting the tension between order and disorder. Lighting and camera angles reinforce the psychological and ethical stakes, particularly in scenes involving Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. Visual storytelling in the film is deliberately crafted to communicate subtext, ensuring that each shot contributes to narrative, character, and thematic development. Dialogue throughout the film carries both narrative and philosophical weight. The Joker's lines, often casual and seemingly flippant, are deeply unsettling and philosophically provocative, challenging assumptions about morality, fear, and human behavior. Batman's measured, principle-driven responses emphasize ethical deliberation and moral restraint, creating a tension-filled interplay between order and chaos. Supporting characters, including Alfred, Gordon, and Lucius Fox, provide additional ethical perspective, reinforcing the film's exploration of responsibility, human fallibility, and moral consequence. Each conversation, even minor exchanges, contributes to the film's rich tapestry of ethical inquiry and psychological tension. Alfred Pennyworth serves as the moral and emotional anchor for Bruce Wayne. Through dialogue, counsel, and personal insight, Alfred reminds both the hero and the audience of the human cost of vigilantism. His perspective underscores the ethical complexity of Batman's mission and the sacrifices required to uphold moral principles in an imperfect world. By emphasizing personal responsibility, prudence, and ethical reflection, Alfred contextualizes Batman's decisions and reinforces the narrative's philosophical depth. The integration of action sequences with thematic concerns exemplifies Nolan's approach to storytelling. The truck chase, the hospital explosion, and the rooftop confrontations are designed to test character morality, decision-making, and ethical restraint. Practical effects and precise choreography enhance realism, while IMAX cinematography magnifies both scale and immersion. These sequences serve as physical manifestations of thematic tension, illustrating the interplay of chaos, heroism, and moral responsibility while advancing the narrative in emotionally and intellectually engaging ways. Batman's final decision to assume responsibility for Two-Face's crimes encapsulates the ethical tension that permeates the film. By preserving the symbolic power of Harvey Dent as Gotham's White Knight, Batman sacrifices his personal reputation and accepts moral ambiguity as the price of maintaining societal order. This resolution reinforces the film's central thesis: heroism often requires ethical compromise, anonymity, and personal sacrifice, and the consequences of moral action are rarely neat or straightforward. The Joker's persistence as an unpunished agent of chaos underscores the enduring tension between order and disorder, leaving audiences with a nuanced meditation on ethics, heroism, and societal fragility. The cultural and cinematic impact of The Dark Knight is profound. Ledger's performance redefined cinematic villainy, and the film's exploration of moral complexity and psychological tension set a new standard for superhero storytelling. Box office success, critical acclaim, and lasting influence demonstrate that the film transcends conventional genre boundaries. Its narrative sophistication, ethical inquiry, and technical innovation, particularly the use of IMAX, practical effects, and meticulous production design, paved the way for a new era of blockbuster filmmaking, blending spectacle with philosophical and moral engagement. The opening of The Dark Knight immediately immerses the audience in a city teetering on the edge of chaos, with Gotham's criminal underworld operating under the illusion of control. The Joker's first appearance through the meticulously orchestrated bank heist establishes him not only as a threat to individuals but as a philosophical adversary to societal order itself. His genius lies in his ability to manipulate human behavior, exploiting fear, greed, and ambition to achieve his ends. Each of his moves is calculated to create confusion, provoke ethical dilemmas, and challenge assumptions about morality, revealing that his crimes are less about material gain and more about exposing the fragility of the structures that maintain order. Nolan's framing of this scene, combined with suspenseful pacing, practical stunts, and a score that underlines both tension and dread, immediately communicates that the narrative will balance spectacle with deep psychological and moral inquiry. Batman's response to the Joker's early attacks is portrayed with layered complexity, emphasizing the tension between moral code and practical necessity. The film carefully illustrates that Batman's vigilance is not simply an expression of physical power but an ongoing negotiation with ethical constraints. One notable sequence involves his deployment of citywide sonar technology to locate the Joker, raising profound questions about surveillance, privacy, and the cost of security. The sequence prompts the audience to consider whether ethical compromise can ever be justified for the sake of the greater good, highlighting a recurring theme: the struggle to maintain moral integrity while confronting extraordinary danger. Batman's navigation of this ethical tightrope situates him as a protagonist whose heroism is inseparable from moral deliberation, personal sacrifice, and the tension between ends and means. Harvey Dent's trajectory from Gotham's principal district attorney to the vengeful Two-Face exemplifies the film's exploration of the fragility of morality under extreme circumstances. Dent initially embodies hope, lawfulness, and moral clarity, inspiring the city and those around him. However, the orchestrated death of Rachel Dawes and Dent's own physical disfigurement catalyze a transformation that reveals the tenuous nature of idealism in a world dominated by chaos. His dependence on chance, manifested in the coin flips that determine life and death, symbolizes a philosophical collapse of ethical certainty. Two-Face's vendetta and selective execution of justice serve as a mirror to Gotham's broader ethical dilemmas, illustrating how trauma, manipulation, and circumstance can corrupt even the most principled individuals. Nolan uses both visual cues, such as Dent's scarred visage and fragmented reflections, and narrative pacing to highlight this transformation, ensuring it resonates on both emotional and thematic levels. Rachel Dawes' death is both a narrative and thematic fulcrum. Her character serves as Bruce Wayne's emotional anchor, grounding his heroic identity in human connection and moral purpose. Her presence reinforces the stakes of Batman's mission and provides the audience with a tangible sense of what is at risk when moral duty collides with chaos. The calculated orchestration of her demise by the Joker demonstrates his capacity not only for violence but for psychological and philosophical disruption. Her absence propels the arcs of both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, amplifying the film's exploration of grief, ethical compromise, and the cost of heroism. Rachel's death underscores the narrative principle that moral action is inseparable from personal sacrifice and that the consequences of choices reverberate far beyond the immediate actors involved. The Joker's manipulation of Gotham's citizens through morally charged dilemmas, most prominently the ferry scenario, exemplifies his philosophical experimentation. By placing ordinary people in situations where self-preservation conflicts with altruism, he exposes the latent moral vulnerabilities of society. Nolan presents these sequences with careful visual and narrative control, combining close framing, dynamic editing, and suspenseful pacing to immerse the audience in the ethical tension. The ferry scenario, in particular, illustrates that morality is often context-dependent and that ethical behavior cannot be assumed under extreme circumstances. These sequences elevate the narrative beyond conventional action storytelling, transforming it into a meditation on human nature, ethics, and societal fragility. Cinematography is central to conveying both the psychological and thematic depth of the film. Wally Pfister's use of IMAX cameras, expansive cityscapes, and intimate character close-ups creates a visual narrative that parallels the ethical and emotional stakes of the story. Gotham's architecture is both grandiose and menacing, with towering skyscrapers, shadowed alleys, and chaotic streets reflecting the tension between order and chaos. Lighting and depth of field are employed to reinforce moral ambiguity and psychological complexity, particularly in scenes involving Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. The city functions as a character in its own right, with its visual design amplifying narrative tension, reinforcing thematic motifs, and grounding the story in a tangible reality that feels lived in and consequential. Dialogue in The Dark Knight is densely layered with philosophical, psychological, and ethical content. The Joker's lines are casual yet deeply unsettling, functioning as aphorisms on chaos, morality, and human nature. Batman's responses, measured and deliberate, underscore the tension between principled ethics and pragmatic necessity. Alfred Pennyworth and Lucius Fox provide critical moral and logistical guidance, illuminating the ethical complexities of Batman's vigilante mission. Even minor dialogue contributes to the moral and thematic richness of the film, ensuring that every interaction serves both narrative development and philosophical reflection. This careful construction of dialogue elevates the film beyond genre conventions, emphasizing the cerebral alongside the visceral. Alfred's guidance is particularly significant, framing Bruce Wayne's moral and emotional journey. Through counsel, reflection, and practical insight, Alfred emphasizes the personal costs of heroism, the dangers of moral compromise, and the necessity of ethical vigilance. His perspective humanizes Batman, situating his vigilante activity within a framework of consequence, reflection, and relational responsibility. Alfred's advice reinforces a central theme of the film: true heroism is inseparable from ethical deliberation, self-restraint, and personal sacrifice. His role ensures that the narrative's moral inquiries are anchored in both character psychology and narrative coherence. The integration of action sequences with narrative and thematic objectives exemplifies Nolan's filmmaking philosophy. The truck chase, the hospital explosion, and the rooftop confrontations are not merely visually spectacular, they are carefully constructed to test character morality, advance plot, and reinforce thematic tension. Practical effects, precise choreography, and IMAX cinematography create immersion and realism, ensuring that spectacle is inseparable from narrative meaning. Each sequence functions as a tangible manifestation of the central conflict between order and chaos, heroism and moral compromise, reinforcing the ethical and philosophical stakes of the story while providing visceral cinematic excitement. The climactic resolution emphasizes the narrative's commitment to moral complexity. Batman's decision to take responsibility for Two-Face's crimes preserves the symbolic power of Harvey Dent as Gotham's White Knight, reinforcing the ethical and narrative consequences of heroism. This act exemplifies the recurring theme that true heroism requires personal sacrifice, moral deliberation, and sometimes anonymity. The Joker's survival underscores the persistence of chaos and the inevitability of moral challenge, leaving audiences with a nuanced meditation on ethical compromise, societal fragility, and the imperfect nature of justice. The resolution balances narrative satisfaction with moral ambiguity, reinforcing the film's intellectual and emotional depth. The cultural and cinematic impact of The Dark Knight is immense and enduring. Ledger's portrayal of the Joker redefined cinematic villainy, setting new standards for character complexity and psychological realism. The film's exploration of morality, ethical ambiguity, and societal tension influenced a generation of superhero and blockbuster storytelling, demonstrating that action-oriented cinema could engage with philosophical, psychological, and moral inquiry. Its box office success, critical acclaim, and lasting influence confirm its position as both a cultural touchstone and a benchmark in modern filmmaking. The integration of technical innovation, narrative depth, and philosophical inquiry exemplifies how blockbuster cinema can operate at the intersection of entertainment, art, and intellectual engagement. The Joker's audacious attack on Gotham's criminal underworld early in the film illustrates his strategic brilliance and philosophical intent. By targeting the city's organized crime hierarchy, he demonstrates that his objective is not mere financial gain but the systematic dismantling of societal order. The heist at the mob-controlled bank serves multiple purposes. It establishes the Joker's cunning, reveals his disregard for conventional morality, and introduces the audience to a villain whose methods are both theatrical and terrifyingly precise. Each action he takes is meticulously calculated to sow fear, confusion, and distrust among those who believe they hold power. Nolan's careful editing, combined with suspenseful pacing and practical stunts, ensures that this sequence is not only visually compelling but narratively meaningful, setting the stage for the broader ethical and philosophical conflicts that drive the film. Batman's vigilante response is portrayed with complexity and moral depth. Unlike conventional superheroes, he is not invulnerable, nor are his actions morally unambiguous. The Joker's escalating threat forces him to weigh the consequences of each decision, including the ethical implications of surveillance, interrogation, and direct intervention. A particularly pivotal sequence involves Batman's use of citywide sonar surveillance to locate the Joker, raising fundamental questions about the balance between security and privacy. While the technology allows him to prevent imminent threats, it also represents an intrusion on civil liberties, highlighting the ethical tension inherent in his role. Nolan frames this sequence with visual and narrative sophistication, illustrating the moral dilemmas faced by someone operating outside conventional legal boundaries. Harvey Dent's arc from principal district attorney to the vengeful Two-Face exemplifies the film's exploration of moral fragility. Initially depicted as Gotham's symbol of hope and lawful integrity, Dent's disfigurement and the loss of Rachel Dawes catalyze a profound psychological and ethical transformation. Two-Face's obsession with chance, represented by the coin, symbolizes the erosion of moral certainty in the wake of trauma. Dent's moral descent is depicted through careful visual storytelling, including the contrast between his clean, controlled appearance as the district attorney and his scarred, chaotic visage as Two-Face. This transformation underscores the central theme that personal loss, when combined with manipulation and circumstance, can corrupt even the most virtuous individuals. Rachel Dawes' death is a critical emotional turning point, both narratively and thematically. Her character serves as a moral compass and humanizing influence on Bruce Wayne, representing the potential for love, normalcy, and personal connection within his otherwise solitary and morally complex life. The Joker's calculated orchestration of her demise amplifies the stakes, forcing Batman to confront the limitations of his protective abilities. Rachel's absence drives the psychological arcs of both Batman and Dent, highlighting the consequences of heroism and the fragility of human hope in a city dominated by chaos. Her death reinforces the narrative's assertion that moral action is fraught with personal cost, and that heroism often demands sacrifice. The Joker's social experiments extend beyond Gotham's criminal class to its citizenry, creating morally charged dilemmas designed to test ethical boundaries. The ferry sequence, in which passengers must decide whether to destroy the other boat to save themselves, exemplifies this approach. The scenario functions as a philosophical inquiry into human nature, morality, and the tension between self-preservation and altruism. By placing ordinary citizens in life-and-death circumstances, the Joker exposes the potential for moral compromise under pressure. Nolan heightens the psychological tension through close framing, dynamic editing, and suspenseful pacing, ensuring that the audience is not merely witnessing action but grappling with the ethical questions embedded within the scenario. Cinematography throughout The Dark Knight reinforces both narrative and thematic concerns. Pfister's use of IMAX sequences, expansive cityscapes, and intimate close-ups creates a visual environment that mirrors the moral and psychological stakes of the story. Gotham City is depicted as simultaneously magnificent and threatening, with towering skyscrapers juxtaposed against shadowed alleyways and chaotic streets. Lighting, camera angles, and depth of field are employed to underscore moral ambiguity, psychological tension, and narrative focus. The careful integration of practical effects with cinematographic techniques ensures that each visual element serves storytelling, character development, and thematic resonance. Dialogue serves as a vehicle for character development and philosophical exploration. The Joker's speech, casual yet deeply unsettling, challenges both the audience and other characters to question assumptions about morality, human nature, and societal structure. Batman's principled, measured responses highlight the contrast between deliberate ethical reasoning and anarchic improvisation. Alfred Pennyworth and Lucius Fox provide moral and practical guidance, reinforcing themes of responsibility, ethical restraint, and human fallibility. Even minor exchanges contribute to the richness of the narrative, ensuring that every spoken word carries weight in terms of plot, character, or theme. Alfred's counsel is particularly significant in contextualizing Bruce Wayne's moral journey. Through conversations, reflections, and warnings, Alfred emphasizes the personal costs of vigilantism, the importance of ethical guidance, and the potential consequences of moral compromise. His role humanizes Batman, grounding the narrative in psychological realism and reinforcing the ethical and emotional stakes of the story. Alfred's influence underscores one of the film's central lessons: heroism entails personal sacrifice, moral vigilance, and constant reflection. Action sequences in the film are intricately tied to narrative and thematic development. The truck chase, hospital explosion, and rooftop confrontations serve to test characters' moral limits while advancing plot and character arcs. Practical effects, precision choreography, and IMAX cinematography create a sense of realism and immersion. Each sequence illustrates the interplay of chaos, heroism, and ethical responsibility, transforming spectacle into a narrative and philosophical tool rather than mere visual entertainment. These sequences highlight Nolan's commitment to integrating action with storytelling, ensuring that thrills are both emotionally and intellectually consequential. The climax of the film demonstrates the culmination of moral, psychological, and thematic arcs. Batman's decision to assume responsibility for Two-Face's crimes preserves Gotham's faith in justice while underscoring the ethical complexity of vigilantism. This act reinforces the notion that true heroism often requires anonymity, deception, and personal sacrifice. The Joker remains unpunished, a testament to the persistent and unrelenting nature of chaos, emphasizing the narrative's central tension between order and disorder. The resolution is morally and philosophically resonant, leaving audiences to reflect on the nature of heroism, ethical compromise, and the fragility of societal structures. The cultural and cinematic impact of The Dark Knight is profound and enduring. Ledger's performance redefined cinematic villainy, elevating expectations for character complexity in blockbuster filmmaking. The film's exploration of ethical ambiguity, psychological tension, and societal fragility influenced subsequent superhero narratives, establishing a new benchmark for thematic sophistication. Box office success, critical acclaim, and audience engagement confirmed the viability of mature, philosophically rich storytelling within the superhero genre. The integration of technical innovation, narrative depth, and ethical inquiry ensured that the film would remain a touchstone for filmmakers, critics, and audiences alike. The narrative tension in The Dark Knight is heightened by the Joker's methodical dismantling of Gotham's moral and social order. Each of his actions is strategically designed to provoke fear, distrust, and chaos among citizens and law enforcement alike. Early in the film, the Joker's audacious bank heist demonstrates his understanding of human behavior, as he manipulates each participant, exploiting greed and fear to achieve a flawless operation. The scene establishes him as a villain who operates on multiple levels simultaneously: practical, psychological, and philosophical. The audience is immediately confronted with the duality of his nature: charming, intelligent, and terrifyingly amoral, setting the tone for a film that consistently examines the tension between chaos and order. Batman's engagement with the Joker emphasizes the ethical dilemmas inherent in vigilantism. Unlike traditional superheroes, his power is inseparable from moral responsibility, and the film continually tests the boundaries of that responsibility. A notable sequence involves Batman's deployment of citywide sonar technology to locate the Joker, raising questions about the ethical use of power, surveillance, and the tension between individual rights and the protection of society. Nolan's careful framing and pacing of this sequence communicate the psychological weight of Batman's decisions, highlighting the persistent tension between principle and necessity. This ethical exploration is central to the narrative, defining Batman's heroism as a negotiation between morality, consequence, and strategic action. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face embodies the fragility of human morality under extreme circumstances. Initially Gotham's symbol of law, order, and hope, Dent's disfigurement and Rachel Dawes' death catalyze his descent into vengeance-driven moral ambiguity. Two-Face's reliance on a coin to dictate justice underscores the randomness of ethical behavior when personal trauma and manipulation intervene. Nolan visually reinforces Dent's moral disintegration through contrast: his clean, composed appearance as a district attorney versus the scarred, chaotic visage of Two-Face. The narrative and visual development of his character illustrates the central theme that morality is both situational and vulnerable to external pressures, demonstrating that even the most principled individuals can be corrupted by circumstance. Rachel Dawes' death functions as both an emotional and narrative fulcrum. She represents the human stakes of Batman's mission, embodying love, hope, and the ethical consequences of heroic action. The Joker's orchestration of her death is not random. It is a calculated act designed to destabilize both Batman and Dent, demonstrating the villain's understanding of psychological manipulation. Her absence drives critical character development, particularly Batman's increased moral burden and dense tragic descent. Rachel's role highlights the narrative's exploration of grief, sacrifice, and ethical responsibility, illustrating that heroism entails significant personal cost and that moral decisions reverberate beyond immediate events. The fairy sequence exemplifies the Joker's philosophical experiments on human behavior. By placing ordinary citizens in a moral dilemma where self-preservation conflicts with altruism, he exposes the latent potential for selfishness and moral compromise under extreme pressure. Nolan's direction amplifies the tension through visual framing, pacing, and immersive cinematography, compelling the audience to engage with the ethical question: can humans act morally under duress, or does survival instinct invariably prevail? This scenario, along with other Joker-engineered crises, transforms the narrative into an exploration of human nature, moral philosophy, and societal fragility, challenging viewers to consider the ethical dimensions of fear, choice, and consequence. Cinematography is integral to the storytelling, reinforcing both psychological tension and thematic resonance. Wally Pfister's use of IMAX cameras, sweeping cityscapes, and intimate close-ups immerses the audience in Gotham's duality, its grandeur and menace, its order and chaos. Lighting, depth of field, and camera angles reflect the moral ambiguity of characters and situations, particularly in sequences featuring Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. Gotham functions almost as a character itself, shaping and reflecting the narrative's ethical and emotional stakes. The practical set design, from Wayne Manor to Gotham's criminalized streets, grounds the story in a visually rich, believable environment that enhances both immersion and thematic depth. Dialogue in the film serves multiple functions: character development, thematic reinforcement, and philosophical reflection. The Joker's lines, casually menacing, challenge assumptions about morality, fear, and societal structure. Batman's principled, deliberate responses highlight the tension between ethical deliberation and the exigencies of combating chaos. Alfred Pennyworth and Lucius Fox provide ethical and logistical insight, framing the moral landscape in which Batman operates. Even minor exchanges contribute to the narrative's philosophical complexity, ensuring that the story continuously engages the audience intellectually as well as emotionally. Alfred's counsel is central to the exploration of Bruce Wayne's moral journey. His guidance emphasizes the personal costs of vigilantism, the consequences of ethical compromise, and the necessity of moral reflection. Through Alfred, Nolan conveys that heroism is not simply a matter of strength or action but involves sustained ethical engagement, introspection, and emotional resilience. Alfred's presence reinforces the stakes of Batman's mission, humanizing the protagonist while contextualizing the psychological and ethical weight of his choices. Action sequences in The Dark Knight are meticulously crafted to serve narrative, psychological, and thematic purposes. The truck chase, the hospital explosion, and rooftop confrontations test both character morality and ethical decision-making while advancing the story. Practical effects, choreographed stunts, and IMAX cinematography enhance realism and immersion, ensuring that the visual spectacle contributes meaningfully to narrative tension. These sequences dramatize the interplay between chaos and heroism, illustrating how ethical, physical, and strategic challenges converge in high-stakes scenarios. Nolan's approach integrates action into storytelling, ensuring that thrills are inseparable from character development and thematic exploration. The climactic resolution emphasizes the ethical complexity at the core of the narrative. Batman assumes responsibility for Two-Face's crimes, preserving the symbolic power of Harvey Dent as Gotham's moral beacon. This act underscores the recurring theme that heroism often requires moral compromise, anonymity, and personal sacrifice. The Joker remains unpunished, symbolizing the persistence of chaos and the limitations of ethical action in a flawed world. This resolution balances narrative closure with philosophical ambiguity, leaving audiences to reflect on the nature of justice, morality, and the consequences of choices in morally complex environments. The cultural, cinematic, and historical impact of The Dark Knight is profound. Ledger's portrayal of the Joker redefined expectations for cinematic villainy, while the film's exploration of ethical ambiguity, psychological tension, and societal fragility elevated the superhero genre. Its critical and commercial success demonstrated that blockbuster films could engage deeply with philosophical, moral, and emotional content. Nolan's integration of technical innovation, narrative sophistication, and thematic depth set new standards for filmmaking, influencing subsequent superhero narratives, blockbuster storytelling, and visual narrative techniques. The film's resonance endures in both popular culture and critical discourse, marking it as a landmark achievement in modern cinema. The Joker's calculated chaos continues to dominate Gotham, his schemes escalating in both complexity and psychological impact. Each plan he executes serves not merely as a plot device but as a philosophical experiment, testing the limits of human morality, societal order, and the ethical resilience of Batman and the city itself. Early in his campaign of terror, the Joker manipulates Gotham's underworld, turning trusted criminal organizations against each other, demonstrating that fear and unpredictability are far more powerful than brute strength or wealth. This tactic emphasizes the central narrative theme, that chaos can destabilize even the most structured systems and that morality is often fragile when confronted with extreme circumstance. Nolan uses precise editing, practical effects, and careful framing to heighten tension, allowing the audience to experience the pervasive sense of uncertainty and dread that Gotham faces under the Joker's influence. Batman's response to escalating threats emphasizes his ethical complexity and the consequences of vigilantism. Unlike traditional heroes, his moral code is constantly tested, forcing him to confront the tension between principle and necessity. The citywide sonar surveillance sequence exemplifies this struggle, as Batman chooses to prioritize the protection of innocent lives over concerns about privacy and civil liberties. Nolan presents this as a moral dilemma rather than a simple tactical decision, highlighting the narrative's persistent focus on ethical ambiguity. Batman's choices are never morally neutral, each action carries consequences, reflecting the real-world complexity of decisions that blur the line between right and wrong. Harvey Dent's descent into Two-Face embodies the central thematic exploration of human vulnerability to trauma and manipulation. Initially Gotham's emblem of justice and integrity, Dent becomes a cautionary figure, illustrating how personal loss, grief, and rage can erode even the strongest moral compass. The use of his coin to make life-or-death decisions symbolizes the randomness of morality when reason and principle are abandoned. Nolan visually reinforces this transformation, contrasting Dent's composed appearance as district attorney with the chaotic, scarred visage of Two-Face, creating a visual metaphor for the internal disintegration of moral certainty. This narrative arc reinforces the film's meditation on the fragility of ethics under pressure, demonstrating that human virtue is constantly subject to external and internal forces. Rachel Dawes' role, though tragically curtailed, is pivotal in shaping the emotional and ethical stakes of the narrative. She embodies the moral compass and human anchor for Bruce Wayne, grounding his mission in empathy, love, and the broader implications of ethical action. The orchestrated circumstances of her death underscore the Joker's ability to manipulate human emotions as effectively as physical systems, amplifying narrative tension and psychological stakes. Her absence propels the arcs of both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, compelling Batman to confront the limitations of his vigilante mission and Dent to spiral into vengeance-driven moral ambiguity. Rachel's character underscores the central principle that heroism is inseparable from personal sacrifice, and that ethical decisions reverberate far beyond their immediate consequences. The ferry sequence is a masterclass in narrative and thematic tension, illustrating the Joker's use of social experimentation to explore human morality. By forcing ordinary citizens into a life-or-death scenario where self-interest conflicts with collective responsibility, he exposes the latent moral vulnerabilities inherent in all individuals. Nolan's direction heightens suspense through close framing, dynamic pacing, and immersive cinematography, making the audience complicit in the ethical dilemma. The sequence transforms conventional action storytelling into a meditation on morality, human nature, and societal fragility, engaging viewers both emotionally and intellectually. The Joker's experiment demonstrates that morality is situational, and ethical behavior cannot be assumed under extreme duress. Cinematography throughout the film reinforces narrative, thematic, and emotional stakes. Wally Pfister's use of IMAX cameras, sweeping cityscapes, and intimate close-ups creates a visual language that mirrors Gotham's duality, its grandeur and menace, its order and chaos. Lighting, shadow, and depth of field are employed to reflect moral ambiguity, psychological tension, and narrative focus, particularly in scenes involving Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. The city itself functions as a character, with architecture and environmental design reinforcing the stakes of moral choice, the vulnerability of human structures, and the pervasive influence of chaos. Visual storytelling in The Dark Knight is deliberate and intricate, ensuring that every frame contributes to character development, ethical exploration, and audience immersion. Dialogue throughout the film serves as both narrative engine and philosophical inquiry. The Joker's lines, often delivered with casual menace, provoke reflection on morality, fear, and the human propensity for corruption. Batman's measured, principle-driven responses highlight the contrast between ethical deliberation and anarchic improvisation. Alfred Pennyworth and Lucius Fox provide essential moral and practical guidance, framing Batman's ethical landscape and underscoring the tension between strategy and principle. Even minor dialogue sequences are loaded with subtext, contributing to the narrative's intellectual depth and reinforcing its continuous exploration of morality, responsibility, and ethical consequence. Alfred's counsel is integral to the narrative's moral framework, humanizing Batman while contextualizing the emotional and ethical stakes of his vigilante mission. Through reflection, guidance, and pragmatic insight, Alfred emphasizes the personal cost of heroism, the dangers of moral compromise, and the necessity of ethical vigilance. His influence ensures that Bruce Wayne's decisions are grounded in moral consideration and personal reflection, reinforcing the film's recurring theme that heroism entails sacrifice, introspection, and the willingness to navigate morally ambiguous territory. Alfred provides both ethical and emotional grounding, ensuring that Batman's journey is coherent, psychologically realistic, and ethically resonant. Action sequences in The Dark Knight are carefully designed to serve both spectacle and thematic depth. The truck chase, hospital explosion, and rooftop confrontations not only provide visceral excitement but also test characters' moral resolve, decision-making, and ethical boundaries. Practical effects, choreographed stunts, and IMAX cinematography enhance realism, ensuring that action is inseparable from narrative and ethical significance. These sequences dramatize the central tension between chaos and heroism, illustrating the convergence of moral, physical, and strategic challenges that define the narrative. Nolan's approach ensures that spectacle reinforces story, character, and theme rather than existing as a superficial addition. The film's climax illustrates the culmination of ethical, psychological, and narrative arcs. Batman's choice to assume responsibility for Two-Face's crimes preserves Gotham's faith in justice while highlighting the personal cost of heroism. This decision embodies the narrative's central theme, that moral action often requires compromise, anonymity, and enduring personal sacrifice. The Joker remains unpunished, symbolizing the ongoing presence of chaos and the limitations of ethical action in an imperfect world. The resolution balances closure with moral ambiguity, compelling audiences to reflect on the nature of justice, the fragility of societal order, and the ethical complexities inherent in heroic action. The cultural, cinematic, and historical significance of The Dark Knight is profound. Ledger's Joker redefined cinematic villainy, combining intelligence, unpredictability, and psychological depth to create a performance that has influenced countless portrayals in both superhero and mainstream cinema. The film's sophisticated engagement with morality, ethical ambiguity, and human behavior set a new standard for the superhero genre, proving that blockbuster storytelling could sustain intellectual and philosophical inquiry without sacrificing visual spectacle. Its commercial success, critical acclaim, and enduring influence demonstrate that The Dark Knight transcended its genre, reshaping expectations for narrative complexity, character development, and thematic depth in contemporary filmmaking. The Joker's relentless escalation of chaos throughout Gotham demonstrates his unique blend of theatricality, intelligence, and psychological insight. Early in the film, his strategy to destabilize organized crime is a masterclass in manipulation, he uses fear, mistrust, and misinformation to turn powerful crime lords against one another, proving that chaos is a more potent tool than conventional power. This strategy also establishes the Joker's philosophical core. He is not motivated by profit or revenge but by the desire to expose the fragility of social order and the moral compromises that individuals make under pressure. Nolan's careful construction of these sequences, through suspenseful pacing, precise editing, and practical stunts, ensures that viewers experience both the spectacle of action and the tension of ethical uncertainty. The Joker operates as a catalyst for narrative, thematic, and psychological exploration, consistently challenging the moral and intellectual frameworks of both the characters and the audience. Batman's responses throughout the film emphasize the ethical challenges inherent in vigilantism. His methods, ranging from physical intervention to high-tech surveillance, highlight the tension between moral principle and practical necessity. The citywide sonar surveillance sequence is emblematic of this conflict. While Batman uses technology to protect innocent lives, he simultaneously infringes upon privacy, illustrating the moral cost of achieving ostensibly just outcomes. Nolan frames these moments with deliberate visual and narrative techniques, emphasizing the weight of decision-making and the psychological burden borne by someone operating outside legal boundaries. Batman's actions are a study in ethical complexity. Heroism is inseparable from compromise, and moral integrity must constantly negotiate with practical exigency. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face exemplifies the film's thematic exploration of the fragility of morality under duress. Dent begins as Gotham's moral paragon, a district attorney who embodies law, justice, and hope. Yet the orchestrated death of Rachel Dawes and his own physical mutilation catalyze a psychological and ethical collapse. Two-Face's reliance on a coin to determine fate symbolizes the erosion of deliberate ethical judgment, illustrating how personal trauma and circumstance can distort moral reasoning. Nolan visually and narratively reinforces this transformation, contrasting Dent's orderly, principled appearance with the scarred, chaotic visage of his alter ego. This character arc underscores the fragility of ethics and demonstrates that virtue is vulnerable to both external manipulation and internal despair. Rachel Dawes' narrative function is central to the emotional and moral stakes of the film. She represents the human cost of vigilantism and the potential for connection, empathy, and moral grounding in Bruce Wayne's life. Her death is not random but a carefully orchestrated act by the Joker, designed to destabilize both Batman and Dent. Rachel's absence propels critical developments. Batman must confront the limits of his protective abilities, and Dent is driven into vengeance-driven moral ambiguity. Her role emphasizes the narrative principle that ethical action and heroism require personal sacrifice and that choices in a morally complex world resonate far beyond the immediate consequences. The fairy scenario highlights the Joker's ability to create morally charged social experiments. By forcing ordinary citizens to confront the dilemma of self-preservation versus altruism, he exposes the latent vulnerabilities of human morality. Nolan amplifies the tension through immersive cinematography, pacing, and framing, compelling the audience to grapple with ethical questions alongside the characters. The scenario elevates the narrative from action storytelling to a profound exploration of human behavior, ethics, and societal structure. It demonstrates that morality is situational, that fear can corrupt ethical reasoning, and that even ordinary individuals can be pushed to extreme compromise when confronted with life-and-death circumstances. Cinematography and visual design reinforce both narrative and thematic concerns throughout the film. Wally Pfister's use of IMAX cameras, sweeping cityscapes, and intimate close-ups creates a visual language that reflects Gotham's duality, its grandeur and menace, order and chaos. Lighting, shadow, and composition mirror ethical tension, psychological struggle, and narrative focus, particularly in sequences featuring Batman, the Joker, and Two-Face. Gotham functions as a living entity, its architecture and streets amplifying moral stakes and character psychology. Set design, practical effects, and environmental storytelling ensure that the city feels tangible and consequential, heightening immersion while reinforcing thematic depth. Dialogue serves as a vehicle for character development, ethical reflection, and philosophical engagement. The Joker's lines, casually menacing and often aphoristic, challenge assumptions about morality, human behavior, and societal stability. Batman's measured, principle-driven responses highlight the tension between deliberate ethical reasoning and the Joker's anarchic worldview. Alfred Pennyworth and Lucius Fox provide moral and practical insight, contextualizing Batman's actions and emphasizing the consequences of ethical compromise. Even minor conversations contribute to the film's moral and intellectual complexity, ensuring that every exchange serves narrative, thematic, and psychological functions. Alfred's counsel is integral to framing Batman's moral and emotional journey. Through pragmatic advice, reflection, and ethical guidance, Alfred highlights the personal cost of heroism, the dangers of moral compromise, and the necessity of ethical vigilance. His presence humanizes Batman, grounding the narrative in psychological realism while reinforcing the film's recurring themes of sacrifice, responsibility, and moral deliberation. Alfred emphasizes that heroism is inseparable from moral reflection, resilience, and an awareness of the human consequences of ethical action. Action sequences in The Dark Knight are intricately designed to integrate spectacle with narrative and thematic significance. The truck chase, hospital explosion, and rooftop confrontations challenge characters' ethical limits while advancing plot and character development. Practical stunts, coordinated choreography, and IMAX cinematography create realism and immersion, transforming visual spectacle into narrative and philosophical engagement. These sequences illustrate the tension between chaos and heroism, demonstrating how moral, strategic, and physical challenges converge in high-stakes scenarios. Nolan ensures that action sequences reinforce story, character, and theme rather than serving as mere entertainment. The climactic resolution emphasizes the narrative's ethical complexity. Batman assumes responsibility for Two-Face's crimes, preserving Gotham's faith in justice while highlighting the personal and moral cost of heroism. This act exemplifies the recurring theme that ethical action often demands personal sacrifice, strategic deception, and moral compromise. The Joker's survival underscores the persistence of chaos and the limitations of human control, emphasizing the narrative's philosophical exploration of moral ambiguity, justice, and societal fragility. Nolan achieves a balance of narrative closure and thematic reflection, leaving the audience to grapple with complex questions about heroism, ethics, and the consequences of choice. The cultural and cinematic impact of The Dark Knight is immense. Ledger's portrayal of the Joker redefined villainy in cinema, blending intelligence, unpredictability, and psychological realism to create a character that transcended genre expectations. The film's nuanced exploration of morality, ethical ambiguity, and societal tension elevated the superhero genre, proving that blockbuster storytelling could engage with intellectual and philosophical inquiry without sacrificing spectacle. Its commercial success, critical acclaim, and enduring cultural influence demonstrate that the film transcended traditional genre boundaries, setting a benchmark for narrative sophistication, character complexity, and thematic depth in contemporary cinema.